Imagine turning on your computer one morning and realizing that the quiet war that shaped personal computing for decades is basically over. Not with a dramatic announcement or a flashy keynote, but with a slow, undeniable shift that already happened while everyone was busy updating apps and checking emails. For years, the story was simple and almost mythical. A giant company on one side and a scrappy open-source operating system on the other. One backed by billions of dollars in global contracts, the other built by volunteers, hackers, students, and idealists. The assumption was always that the giant would win forever. And yet here we are, watching a reality where Microsoft can't actually stop Linux anymore, no matter how much it might want to, because the world itself has changed in ways that make stopping Linux practically impossible. If you go back to the 1990s and early 2000s, the personal computer world felt like a kingdom ruled by a single crown. Windows was everywhere. It came pre-installed on almost every PC. It powered offices, schools, internet cafes, gaming rigs, and corporate networks. For many people, Windows wasn't just an operating system, it was the computer. Meanwhile, Linux felt like something mysterious and intimidating, a black screen full of commands, used by programmers or server admins who seemed to speak a different language. It looked like an underdog that might always stay niche. Back then, Microsoft's strategy was straightforward and brutally effective. Control the desktop, control the software ecosystem, control the standards. If developers built for Windows first, users would stick with Windows. If businesses depended on Windows-only tools, switching costs would be too high. If hardware manufacturers optimized for Windows drivers, alternatives would feel broken. It was a near-perfect loop. And in that loop, Linux didn't look like a threat at all. But Linux didn't try to fight Windows where Windows was strongest. It didn't try to win the living room or the average family PC at first. Instead, it quietly spread into places most people never saw. Servers, universities, research labs, early web hosting companies, anywhere people needed something stable, cheap, and flexible. And because it was open source, anyone could tweak it, improve it, or fix bugs without waiting for permission. It evolved like a living organism, adapting to every environment it touched. While Windows updates were scheduled releases controlled by a corporate roadmap, Linux grew through communities. Thousands of contributors across the globe added drivers, patched security flaws, and optimized performance. That difference in DNA mattered more than anyone realized at the time. Microsoft moved like a corporation. Linux moved like a swarm. Then the internet exploded. Websites became businesses. Businesses became platforms. And suddenly, servers mattered more than desktops. The computer you used became less important than the machines running the cloud. And those machines, almost silently, were running Linux. By the time people started talking about cloud computing, Linux had already taken over the back end of the internet. Hosting providers loved it because it was free. Engineers loved it because it was customizable. Startups loved it because they could deploy thousands of servers without paying license fees. Microsoft couldn't just ban it or undercut it because you can't undercut free, and you can't outmaneuver something that anyone can copy and improve. This is where the first crack in Microsoft's dominance appeared. They had spent decades mastering the desktop, but the world was drifting toward the cloud. And Linux was already there, waiting. Then virtualization and containers showed up. Tools like Docker and Kubernetes made it easy to package applications and run them anywhere. Developers stopped caring what operating system was underneath, as long as their containers worked. Linux became the default base layer for almost all of this tooling. It was lightweight, scriptable, and perfectly suited for automation. Windows, by comparison, felt heavy and rigid. At that moment, the game changed. The operating system wasn't the star anymore. It was just plumbing, and Linux was the best plumbing around. Microsoft tried to compete by pushing Windows Server harder, but companies kept choosing Linux because it scaled better and cost less. Every time a startup spun up a new cluster, every time a developer deployed a new microservice, Linux gained ground. It wasn't a marketing victory, it was a practical one. And then something even more ironic happened. Microsoft stopped fighting Linux directly and started embracing it. This would have sounded insane 20 years ago. The same company that once called Linux a threat suddenly began contributing to open-source projects. They launched their own Linux-based tools. They built the Windows subsystem for Linux so developers could run Linux inside Windows. They even put Linux virtual machines at the center of their cloud platform. Why? Because they didn't have a choice. When your customers demand Linux, you either support it or lose them. And Microsoft wasn't willing to lose. Think about that for a second. A company that once tried to crush Linux now helps maintain it. That's not charity. That's survival. The rise of developers played a huge role in this shift. Modern software development lives in terminals, Git repositories, package managers, and automation scripts. Linux fits naturally into that world. It feels like it was built for developers because, in many ways, it was. Windows had to bolt those capabilities on later. Even today, many programmers feel more at home in a Linux shell than in traditional Windows tools. When the people building the future prefer Linux, you can't stop Linux. You can only adapt. Then there's education. Universities teach Linux. Coding boot camps teach Linux. Cloud certifications assume Linux. A whole generation of engineers grows up seeing Linux as normal. It's not exotic anymore. It's the default. That cultural shift is something no marketing campaign can reverse. Hardware also changed the equation. Linux runs on everything. Old laptops, tiny single-board computers, routers, smart TVs, cars, supercomputers. It's everywhere because it's adaptable. Microsoft focuses mainly on PCs and servers, but Linux quietly spreads into every corner of technology. When your fridge, your car dashboard, and your smartwatch might all be running Linux under the hood, stopping it becomes meaningless. And let's talk about money. Linux costs nothing to license. Companies can deploy thousands of machines without worrying about per-device fees. In a world where infrastructure scales dynamically, licensing costs matter more than ever. Windows can't easily compete with Zero. Even if Microsoft lowered prices, free will always win at scale. Security is another factor. Open source means thousands of eyes scanning the code. Bugs get found and patched quickly. While no system is perfect, many organizations trust Linux because they can inspect it themselves. They're not dependent on a single vendor's promises. That transparency builds trust, and trust is hard to buy back once lost. Meanwhile, Microsoft's own business priorities changed. They make more money from cloud services and subscriptions now than from selling Windows licenses. So fighting Linux aggressively doesn't even make financial sense anymore. If Linux workloads run on their cloud, they still get paid. In fact, Linux customers are some of their biggest customers. Killing Linux would hurt their own revenue. It's almost poetic. The thing they once tried to destroy now feeds their business. Gaming used to be Windows' unbreakable fortress, but even that is shifting. Compatibility layers and better drivers have made Linux gaming more viable. Handheld devices and consoles increasingly rely on Linux-based systems. The gap is shrinking. It's not perfect, but it's no longer laughable. Every improvement chips away at Windows' last exclusive advantage. What makes Linux unstoppable isn't just technology. It's philosophy. It belongs to everyone and no one. There's no single company to pressure, no CEO to outmaneuver, no board to sue. Even if Microsoft somehow outcompeted one distribution, 10 others would pop up. You can't kill an idea that anyone can copy. That's the fundamental difference. Windows is a product. Linux is an ecosystem. Products can fail. Ecosystems evolve. If Microsoft tried to crush Linux today the way it fought competitors in the past, it would backfire. Developers would revolt. Enterprises would migrate faster. Regulators would watch closely. And because Linux is already embedded in the core of the internet, replacing it would be like trying to replace oxygen. The world just wouldn't cooperate. So instead of stopping Linux, Microsoft partnered with it. They hire Linux developers. They contribute code. They ship tools for it. They turned former enemies into collaborators. It's one of the biggest strategic pivots in tech history, and it happened quietly, almost reluctantly. And here's the twist. This isn't a story about Microsoft losing. It's about reality forcing them to change. The modern computing world is too decentralized, too open, and too developer-driven for any single company to control everything. The age of one operating system ruling all is over. Linux thrives because it doesn't need permission. Anyone can use it, fork it, improve it, or build on top of it. That freedom means it will always find new homes, new devices, new niches. Even if Windows vanished tomorrow, Linux would keep going. But if Linux vanished, huge chunks of the internet would collapse overnight. That asymmetry tells you everything. So when people ask why Microsoft can't stop Linux anymore, the answer isn't dramatic or conspiratorial. It's structural. The battle isn't winnable. Linux isn't just software now. It's infrastructure. It's culture. It's education. It's cloud computing. It's embedded systems. It's the invisible layer powering the modern world. Trying to stop it would be like trying to stop the tide with your hands. And maybe that's the most interesting part of the story. The underdog didn't win with flashy ads or billion-dollar deals. It won by being useful, adaptable, and free. It won by showing up everywhere and solving problems quietly. It won by letting anyone join. In the end, Microsoft didn't lose to Linux, they joined it. Because when something becomes this essential, you don't fight it, you build with it. And that's why Linux isn't just surviving anymore, it's unstoppable.